Okay, I guess I'm going to get started. We are, this workshop is Nominations and Elections Guidance for Virtual Meetings. My name is Jacqueline Wilson. I am the Bylaws Coordinator, and there's my contact information. I will try to address questions at the end of the presentation, but I'm going to try to give you some information regarding things that may have to happen as in case of a virtual meeting, and what do we do if we need to have elections. For all information on nominations and elections, we have a very, very well-documented resource guide, Section 7, that is found on the New York State website. And you can open that and take a look at it, and it gives you detailed information on everything nominations and elections. So what to do in the case of not being able to have a live meeting? Well, a number of different scenarios could be the case. So let's start with the nominating committee has been elected. So you elected your nominating committee back in March, February, whatever, at your live meeting. So they can do a conference call or a virtual meeting, Zoom, FaceTime, whatever, and they would have to deliberate on who will be the best candidate for each position. Once they've completed their slate, they then must report it to the president so it can be posted for the membership. Now you have to make sure that you check your bylaws to see if your bylaws include the sentence that a 2-day notice must be given to the nominating committee chair if you intend to run from the floor. And when you post, and your report has to be posted at least 2 weeks or 1 month prior to your meeting, then you would have to include that sentence there that in order to run from the floor, a 2-day notice must be given to the nominating committee chair. So if you have not elected your nominating committee, then you will need to do so by a virtual meeting. You can try to wait until we have a live meeting. Again, we don't know when that's going to happen. Or you can hold a virtual meeting and elect the committee members according to your unit bylaws, which means you will need to have 2 meetings. One meeting to elect the members of the executive board, that would be an executive board only meeting, and one meeting for the entire membership, so that would be for the members from the association who are part of the who will be part of the nominating committee. So you'd have to have those 2 meetings. Live meeting election is obviously the best way to go, okay? And then again, you could follow your guidelines as outlined in the resource guide, Section 7. If not possible, then you need to set up for a virtual meeting. So what do we do? A virtual meeting generally works best for a small group, like an executive committee or an executive board, or just a committee meeting. However, the most important advice is to be sure that you are planning for the meeting carefully before you hold it. We have a number of resources on the website, COVID-19 special section on the website that gives you a lot of information in detail about how to run a virtual meeting. Formats for meetings could be a conference call, a video conference, and again, you may have to set up an account for your PTA if you do not have one. Some of the platforms have a cost. Some are only for a certain amount of time if they're free, or for a certain amount of members, number of people. So be sure to research this carefully. And obviously, with the number of people that are using virtual meetings at this particular time, there are so many out there. I had included with this workshop, one of the things I included was all the different platforms for virtual meetings.
Jackie, remotely, but I can't hear her. But I think it's because Sonia turned my sound off on my computer. I can't hear her.
Okay. Choose a platform so that all members who wish to attend will be able to, whether by video or phone. And this must be an association meeting, which means you have to send it out to your entire membership. Announce the meeting date and time once the slate has been completed. And again, make sure to indicate if a 2-day notice is needed to run from the floor. And of course, send along an agenda. And in this case, the only item on the agenda would be the election of officers. All potential attendees should receive advance notice of the meeting, date, time, link, or phone number. Be aware of the availability of technology in your area, or for those who may be unfamiliar with what you're using. Some areas of the state have wonderful bandwidth. Some others do not have great connections on cable, etc. So therefore, it's very important that you check that out ahead of time so that anyone who wishes to can join the meeting. Try to do a run-through. Take your executive committee and try to do a run-through to look for potential pitfalls that might occur during the meeting. And again, you have to realize that you have to work either by phone or other technology. Send out a meeting agenda in advance and any supporting materials for the meeting. So if you are having an election meeting, obviously this is what this is about, then you would want to make sure that you put up the slate of officers, that there was a 2-day notice, and whether or not anyone would be running from the floor. Contact your region director for assistance with the meeting. Our regions have had a lot of have had a lot of experience with this. Most of them have had to run their annual meetings of elections, and they've had to run them virtually. So they're very familiar with voting procedures and how to run the meeting and reports, et cetera. So they can certainly be a resource to you in getting you started. Conducting the meeting, make sure that you have a quorum, check your bylaws, and make sure the secretary is taking accurate minutes. You might even want to appoint somebody as an auditor, and that would be someone who just also takes information down so that they can compare it with the secretary's minutes so that you know you have recorded everything as accurately as possible. If you're going to record the meeting, make sure you let everybody know ahead of time that the meeting will be recorded. The first scenario, no candidates running from the floor. So if you have your nominating committee meeting, they have put up a slate of officers, and there is no one who has put in an intent to run from the floor, that's the easiest meeting to conduct, because then you can do each of the candidates by voice vote. The nominating, just like you would at a regular election meeting, the nominating committee chair announces the proposed slate of officers. The president will then announce each office in turn and allow for a voice vote. And once the candidates have been elected, you've completed your meeting. So that, of course, is the best case scenario. Scenario 2, candidates have given notice of intent to run from the floor. The nominating committee chair will read the proposed slate of officers. The president will ask if there were any notices of intent to run received. Any office for which there is more than one candidate must have a ballot election. Now, since you have to know this, you will know this 2 days prior to the meeting, it might be possible to put together a ballot ahead of time. John Smith, Jane Doe. Okay, these are the 2 people who will be running for president. Since you will know that ahead of time, you can then prepare the ballots ahead of time and format which you are going to be using. Each office that is being contested should have a separate vote. So maybe it's only the office of secretary that's being contested. So you would go through president, vice president, you would skip secretary, go to treasurer, and then you can come back to secretary and have the ballot vote if necessary for the office of secretary. Again, when conducting the election, make sure that you have a platform that will work best for your PTA. Also on the COVID-19 page, there are instructions for creating a Google form for elections and a step-by-step scenario on how you might need to run an election. So it gives you a lot of tips. It actually goes through an entire dialogue about running an election. Scenario 3, candidates may run from the floor. Some bylaws do not have that clause in their bylaws that says candidates must inform the nominating committee chair 2 days prior to the meeting of their intent to run. This would be the most difficult election to conduct and should be done with the utmost care and guidance. So what would happen is you would not know if anybody was going to run from the floor necessarily until the day of the meeting. So the president will announce the nominating committee's choice for the office. Again, the nominating committee chair would give his or her report right up front. And then the president would say, for the office of president, we have Jane Smith. And then she must ask, are there any members who wish to run from the floor? Or does anybody wish to be nominated to run for the office of president? Or does anybody have a nomination for the office of president? And if there is one or two, then you would immediately stop. You would have to set up a ballot. And you can do this with a Google form by having, let's say, letter A be assigned to Jane, letter B is assigned to John. And then once all the candidates have been listed, then you would send the Google form to their email, to the person's email, the member's email, and then they could vote for either A or B. Now, in this case, you might have some lag time for results. So you'd have somebody else who would be in charge of receiving those ballots and be able to tally the ballots. So you might not have a total immediately. There's also doodle poll, which you might be able to do. And again, I have a list of all of those formats. There is something called election meeting or run-in election. There's several different items out there. Some may be easier than the others. And again, I would suggest that you investigate which of these would be the best for you to do in this case. In the case of scenario 3, I would definitely ask for region or state help to come in on this, because it can be very, very confusing when you have candidates that are running from the floor. So it's the least of the scenarios that we like to see. If members are only available by phone, again, that would then facilitate having an alternate method for them to be able to vote, whether it be by text. Okay, you could assign each member a number, and then they text that number with their vote to another person. So it is a blind vote. One person knows the number, the other person knows the email, but they don't know the connection, so that you can then vote by text on the phone. Sometimes you will have to say that the membership that we don't know if we will have the election results right away, but as soon as we do, we will announce those election results as soon as we can. Important things to note: be prepared. This is new territory for all of us. There are going to be glitches. There are going to be loopholes. There are going to be pitfalls, and it's just going to happen because none of us, or most of us, are not as familiar with this kind of technology as we might want to be. So ask for help, please. If you know, as I say, your region director, they can help you. Contact somebody at the New York State PTA, one of us. You can see all of our emails are on the website, and ask us for assistance. Very, very important, and we can walk you through how this scenario should go. Keep accurate minutes. You can also ask someone, as I mentioned before, to audit the meeting. That means they are also keeping account of what's going on in the meeting. So you always want to maintain that transparency with your members, so that you let them know that you are trying to do this to the best of your ability. And let the membership know that these are extremely difficult times, and the executive committee is doing their best to complete the election as fairly as possible. So that's very important, because you want to make sure, tell your members that we are trying to do a vote as best as possible. We hope that we don't have any issues, but we may. So as we said before, for this particular case where people can run from the floor, it is the most difficult meeting to run, and it may be best to wait till a live meeting if possible. If not, and you certainly need to get your officers in place, we understand that for September, it can be done. Here are some special rules for Zoom meetings, okay? Make sure that you have everyone sign in with their names, not just the initials, so that you know you are talking to, or you are letting a person in who is a member. Only those members who should be part of the meeting should be getting an email. For example, if it's an executive board meeting, only those executive board members should be getting that email, and they are not to be sharing it with other people who are not part of the executive board. Participation, okay, Zoom is something that you can do with everything face-to-face. Webcams, members must participate with a webcam enabled for the duration of the meeting. Okay. Connectivity, again, everybody's responsible for their connection. And you have to realize that sometimes people will get kicked off or whatever. Be aware of that, and please make every effort to let them know that you really don't have any control over whether or not their internet is going to continue. Interference and noise. Make sure that you would put people on mute immediately when they join the meeting, so that any background noise, any background sounds that are going on, any chit chat between members is not heard by the entire group, because that would derail your meeting very, very quickly. So you want to make sure that if a person wishes to speak, use the chat box, okay? You could use somebody as a text. You could have somebody monitoring a text for people who are on the phone, so they can text, "I'd like to speak." And then that way, the person in charge of the text can let the presenter or the president know this person would like to speak, and then they can be unmuted in order to speak. Recognition, generally to seek recognition, as we said, you could raise your hand if it's a Zoom, okay? If you're on a phone, you could do it by text. And try to keep an order to everything so that you know who's first in line, who's second in line. And you would want to make sure you had meeting rules so that anybody who wishes to speak, there's an order, like you form a line when you go up to speak at a microphone, and the first person in line gets to speak first, and the second person, and then the person who spoke already doesn't get to speak until everybody else who wishes to has spoken. And that way, no one person can take over the meeting or dominate the conversation. And that, again, is just trying to be as fair as you can, much like you would at a regular live meeting. Okay, everybody should have the ability to speak first before someone has an ability to speak second. Interrupting motions, again, that's something that you have to make sure you have some of these icons with Zoom meetings where you can put up a hand or you can put up a thumbs up to vote. Those are some of the little things that are on Zoom. Whoops, where are we going here? And how are we voting? Unanimous consent. That's, as we said, when you have a meeting in which you have no candidates, no election officers contested. Unanimous consent is the business. Raising your hand, I don't know if that would be so good for a ballot vote for an election. It might be okay for voting on a motion or an amendment or a decision. Rising vote can't really be done too well at a Zoom meeting. An icon for using, you have to be careful with using these icons because sometimes they may be available, sometimes not. A roll call vote is generally not used for a ballot election because it's not private. So everybody knows who you're voting for. A roll call vote can be used for meetings in which, as I said, there's a decision to be made, there's a budget amendment to be passed to change the amount of money in the budget. So that's fine to do a roll call vote. Then you know that everybody who wishes to vote can have the opportunity. Or vote by chat box. Again, not a good idea if you're doing an election. Okay, so that's the basics of running an election here. With the COVID-19 and with the fact that we are doing things virtually and not live. And I can see if we have any questions here. All right. Stop sharing, that's good. Okay. Okay, couple of questions here. Can you do it through Zoom polling? Again, that would be some, let's see, where are we here? I hope I'm catching this up here. Polling is something that you can do for a vote that's being taken on a motion or a decision, but I would not recommend polling for elections. If the nominating committee released the proposed slate prior to the scheduled meeting and there were no letters of intent to run from the floor, do we have to again let people know that if they want to run from the floor prior to the rescheduled virtual meeting, or can we proceed since no one expressed an intent to run when the slate was first presented? I would put out the notice again. Once you have scheduled your meeting date, put the slate out and put the date, put the information about the 2-day notice. So you're going to be hopefully sending, you should be sending your meeting notice out 30 days prior So that way anyone would have more than enough time to decide whether or not they would like to run from the floor. So yes, I believe you should put it out there again, especially since the meeting was postponed in the first place. And therefore you want to make it fair. Again, it's all about fairness and transparency. That's extremely, extremely important. Let's see. Can we proceed since no one expressed? Okay, just answered that one. Can you go over the virtual nominating committee meeting? I didn't follow why you need 2 votes. Okay, according to your bylaws, you have a nominating committee of X number of members, 3, 5, 7. It's always an odd number. Within that number, 3, 5, 7, in your bylaws, it states that 3 must be from the executive board, and 2 must be from the general membership, whatever your unit has decided in the bylaws, as long as there's a total of an odd number of members. So you would have an executive board meeting to elect those 3 members from the executive board. They're only voted on by the executive board. They represent that body on the nominating committee. Then you would have an association meeting for everyone, in which you would elect the 2 members from the association. And those 2 members would represent the association or the general membership at the nominating committee meeting. It's to ensure a fair and balanced nominating committee. If all of the members were from the executive committee, or all the members were from the executive board, you would have no input from the general members, your general volunteers, who maybe aren't chairs of a committee, but who do attend your meetings, who do volunteer at events, who might have a lot of input because they know people. They know people in the PTA, and they can, let you know that these people are possible candidates that you might want to consider for office. So it is important for you to have that representation from both your executive board as well as your association. And then there's this fairness, there's an equity there so that everyone doesn't think, oh, well, they're just choosing all the same people because they all know each other. That's not how we want to represent, the nominating committee. Okay. I'm on the council and we announced the slate, but we'll accept 2 days notification. Is it easier to identify our delegates from each unit and send email ballots and have them return in the specific nominating email address? Can we create and combine the bylaws update and budget in the same email? I would say not a good idea to do all of that in one email because budget, bylaws, 2 separate things from election, and you don't want to complicate any of your votes or tie them all together. They are votes for your election votes, and then you have to vote on the budget and you have to vote on the bylaws. So I would definitely not combine everything together, okay, because they are going to be 3 separate votes on 3 very, very separate items that will probably need discussion, okay? So you don't want to have to run the bylaws in and then, say, oh, now we're going to run to the budget, now we're going to run to the election. So I would not send that in the same email, simply because people could get very confused. All right, as far as, I'm not getting your question on, is it easier to identify our delegates from each unit? Yeah, as I say, I would definitely address it in 3 separate emails, okay? Especially in council, council, the bylaws have to be approved by 2/3 of the units as part of the council. So that's not an individual vote, that's a vote of a unit. And then that unit brings its 1 vote back to the council and says, we agree with the council bylaws changes, we don't agree with the council bylaws changes. So that's not an individual vote anyway. Of course, the election is, but with the bylaws, it's a vote of the unit. So the bylaws, the president or the council delegate has to bring that up at their individual unit meeting. And then 1 person comes back with the vote from the unit. And you have to have 2/3 of the units in your council voting in favor in order to move the bylaws forward. Other questions? Some units have 2 votes according to our bylaws. No, they don't have 2 votes, not when it comes to things such as bylaws, because bylaws is an instructed vote. An instructed vote that is each unit gets its own vote. So every unit is represented equally when it comes to bylaws. That's an instructed vote. Other things, you might have some units with 2 delegates versus 1. That's why it's always important to have those delegates on the council. You're as a representative, and whatever number of delegates your unit is entitled to, it's important to make sure that you have those delegates available to be at the council meetings. But bylaws is that every unit gets 1 vote for the bylaws. Other questions? Any other comments? The other item that will be included when you get the presentation is a list of voting platforms, okay, so that you can look at them, and some have a size, you know, a size limit, some have a cost limit, some are mobile friendly, some are suitable for ballots, some are not. So you have to be careful when you're looking at that page on the possible voting platforms. Election is by delegate vote. Now you're talking about election for council officers. Yes. Okay, that's not by units, that's by delegate votes. So you would put your proposed slate up for the council officers, and only the council body, whoever are the actual members of council, your president, your delegates, and anybody else who's on the executive board, such as the principal, administrator, historian, teacher liaison, whoever is part of your executive board is part of your council voting body. So you have to look at your voting body, and it tells you how many delegates and the executive board and the voting delegates, and that's according to your bylaws. Yes, and the unit's only in good standing. Okay, it says only the unit's in good standing. Yes, if a unit is not in good standing, one of the things that the council can do to try to help get them in good standing is remind them that they may lose their ability to vote at the council level. So that's absolutely important, okay? Via Google Forms to vote, can you put vote for multiple positions? I would only do 1 per form. Again, it depends on how many people you have, and if you start assigning things, you know, you really should do it by the office. So 1 for treasurer, 1 for president, 1 for secretary, so that there's no confusion about, especially if you're having nominations from the floor, or even if you're not, because you want to take each office separately. You don't want to do a ballot where people can just mark off. You want to take each office separately. Doing a vote like that might be okay if you're doing a live meeting, and then you can prepare a ballot ahead of time, secretary, treasurer, president, if you know the people who are running. But doing it by virtual, I would say do each office separate. Is every single chairperson in the unit part of the executive board? Well, that's a $64,000 question. Generally, if you look at our board information on the resource guide, your executive board consists of your officers, sometimes your immediate past president, if they are listed, your principal, teacher liaison, historian, council delegate. And again, that depends on what is written in your bylaws, and all the chairmen of standing committees, okay? Now you're not supposed to have co-chairmen, so if you have 2 chairs of a committee, only one of them gets to vote as part of the executive board. What are your standing committees? In general, standing committees are those committees that operate pretty much the entire year. A literacy committee, an education committee, a hospitality committee, a ways and means committee. Special events like a plant sale, you can argue, well, it's really working all year long, but it's a special event. It's not something like a PARP chair that is a program that is run, or reflections that is run pretty much a good chunk of the year. So it is really up to your unit to decide which of these committees are those for which we run all year. So if your spirit committee would be a ways and means committee, if that is doing events all year long, okay, running a spirit wear sale, for example, that committee could be part of your standing committees. So it's generally defined, and they're not defined specifically in the bylaws. But for example, your nominating committee is not a standing committee. They're elected for a specific purpose, and then they're done. Bylaws is not a standing committee. It's elected for a specific purpose, and then they're done. So any committee for which people are elected for a specific purpose, a specific event, like nominations or bylaws, is not considered a standing committee. And you want to remember that you don't want to make your executive board positions so vast that when you're trying to find and get a quorum for an executive board meeting, a quorum for the executive board meetings are a majority of members. So if you have a 35-member executive board, that means you cannot take a vote unless you have at least 18 members present. So by making it too large, now you're upping your quorum, which could preclude you from having enough members if you had to take a vote, like an election, okay? Election for nominating committee. So that's very important to know. So it's really, non-council level committees, it really depends on the committee. A scholarship committee, something that works all year long. So that would probably be a standing committee. A budget committee, no. Budget committee does the budget, then they're finished for the year. You might have another budget committee the following year. So those are committees that are not standing committees. But again, there's a fine line between what is a standing committee and what is not. Again, if the committee does not really operate the entire school year, or is for a specific event, then that would not be considered a standing committee. Budget approval is an instructive vote. I have to look at that. I believe it is, but check your council guide. Don't know all this off the top of my head, that particular thing. Check the council guide, section 3, I think it is, in the resource guide for that answer. I'm not totally sure it's an instructed vote. I would assume it is, but I'm not totally sure. So please, you'd have to check that on your own. I apologize for that one. I can't think of it off the top of my head. Okay. Other questions, comments, anything else you'd need to know? Again, the most important thing I can stress with the virtual meeting is transparency, is making sure that you are well prepared, is asking for help, is doing a run through, is keeping good minutes, is making sure that all of your members who wish to be a part of the meeting can be, and that no one who does not have access that wishes to be a part, there's a way to bring them in if possible. So it's very, very important. And again, it's not the most ideal situation, and we have to remind our members of that, this is new for everybody, and will mistakes be made? Maybe, but we're doing the best we can. I had a unit that tried to run a virtual election and doing it, ignoring their bylaws. Any suggestions to kindly push them in the right direction? Well, if you have an issue with an election that was not run properly, then there is a time to contest the election, and that would be to do it at the next meeting. So you want to make sure that you bring up the fact that we didn't have an election in the proper way. I believe the election should be contested. And then I would say contact your region director to try and get somebody in there to help you run the meeting properly. But yes, it is your right as a member to ask for, how did this election run? Where are the ballots, et cetera, to make sure that the election was run properly. And that's why we say guidance, guidance, guidance. And that's why from day one on the New York State website, we put up the COVID-19 tab for that very reason, to try and help units navigate through this very difficult and trying time. Our membership attendance to in-person meetings are normally no more than 15 to 20. We're a small participation school. We have to have at least 10 members to vote. Will that change when we have virtual meetings, like a 2/3 vote of the attendance? You have to go by what your quorum is. If your quorum is generally for an association meeting, is generally anywhere between 10 and 20. Check your bylaws. Your bylaws will tell you what the quorum is for an association meeting. Okay, generally it's not more than 20. For a small unit, it's generally 10. It's usually 2 times the number of officers, but no less than 10. So if you have 10 persons available for the meeting and at the meeting, and it's a general meeting, okay, then you can have a vote. And that's when your election, don't forget, your elections are run at a general meeting. So your quorum does not have to be 50% of the majority of your members. That would be nearly impossible if you have a unit of 100 members. So look at your bylaws and it'll tell you what the quorum is for an association meeting. For an executive board meeting, you're not really voting except for the nominating committee. You're not really voting on any offices at the executive board meeting. That has to be a majority of the executive board. Yes, you're voting for nominating committee members, but other votes are not involved with elections. With elections, you want to make sure that everyone who wants to has the ability to vote. Okay, it's their unit. Okay, as members, they are entitled to their vote. And so therefore, you never want to take away the right of the member, which is why we have the ability to run from the floor in certain cases, or give 2-day notice to run from the floor. So that even if someone is not put on the slate by the nominating committee for office, they have the right to challenge that office and run from the floor based on what their bylaws say. Okay, so no, it doesn't change for virtual meetings. It is whatever is stated in your current bylaws. We are trying our best not to, I want to say tweak, but not to go against what the bylaws say here. We generally do not allow for virtual meetings for elections. They are supposed to be done live. Obviously, these circumstances cannot accommodate that. So a directive did come down from National way back when in March that we could be able to do this. And in fact, National Convention, which has been running virtual these past couple of weeks, will be doing its voting starting Sunday, and it's being done virtually. So we have voting for some offices, some positions at the National PTA, and we will be doing that virtually. We'll be given a voter email, and then, haven't really gone through it yet, so I can't explain exactly how it's going to be done, but we are doing voting virtually at National Convention. Questions, other questions, anything else? Again, my email, bylaws@nyspta.org. Please feel free to email me with any questions about elections, bylaws, virtual or not. We usually always do a webinar on bylaws, on nominations and elections every year, usually around February, right around the time that you are electing your nominating committees. So therefore, look for that webinar. There are actually past webinars that I have done up on the website, which will help you to navigate your way through that process in a real setting, okay, not a virtual setting. And so when we hopefully get back to normal before January, things will be a little bit better, but there is a lot of information in the resource guide as well, section 7, which can give you everything that you need to know. I'll hang on a bit for some questions if any else want to chat. Otherwise, thank you for attending. And I wish you the best with your next workshop, which is to start about 3 o'clock, I think. So you got a few minutes in between. I'll hang out here in the chat for any other questions. Thank you so much for attending. We do appreciate it. I think, Donnie, you can stop the recording if you want.